What do Pfizer, BlackRock, Facebook, and banks have in common? Pfizer, an elusive $214 billion entity, is the third largest pharmaceutical company in the world. To describe it, in recent journalistic literature, names and similarities of all kinds and species have been wasted, like a titan. Someone writes, recalling the ancestral cosmogonic forces, others associate it with Moloch, the fearsome Canaanite deity of the Old Testament. There are also those who resort to the frightening figure of Leviathan, also from the Old Testament. We also reached Humbaba, the terrifying guardian of the forest in the Epic of Gilgamesh. In short, he let his imagination run wild and, as often happens, he went too far by moving away from the facts. However, while we're at it, we want to contribute to enrich the list and add the image of Briareus, not to participate in the deferral game, but to offer a medium of relevance. Briareus, son of Uranus and Gaia, has 50 heads and 100 hands. Not surprisingly, he is otherwise known as Saint Imani. In fact, we propose to guide the reader into the dark forest of those financial intertwining that characterize the world of drugs and, today, in particular of anti-COVID vaccines. Mind you, for the avoidance of doubt, in one part of the forest. This is an article, not a dossier, and it is well understood that, instead, an adequate correspondence would be needed. Precisely, we were talking about Briareo, a mythological metaphor with 50 heads and 100 hands, which should not lead us straight to the idea of the plot of the occult plutocrats. It would be ridiculous and indifferent, as well as impertinent. However, we have a duty to strictly observe the data and the circumstances in which it was formed. Let's start by saying that Pfizer's shareholding includes some insurmountable investment giants such as Vanguard, BlackRock, and Wellington, which respectively own 8.12%, 7.46%, and 4.22% of the U.S. pharmaceutical giant. Even if they need no introduction, for the record let's say who they are, what they do and what value they have on the market. BlackRock is the most powerful and richest investment company in the world, is a thoroughbred American, manages assets of more than $8 trillion and has been called a shadow World Bank, invisible rock and the like. Vanguard Group is another U.S. investment firm, has assets of over $5 trillion and, in terms of fund trading, is second only to BlackRock. The smallest of the group, small, so to speak, is the Wellington Management Company, another U.S. investment company, with a management of about $1,500 billion. The latter, among other things, is closely related to the Vanguard. So far, nothing but an ordinary international finance framework. Without too much effort, however, it turns out that BlackRock and Vanguard are also the largest institutional investors of Facebook, BlackRock with 6.59%, Vanguard with 7.71%. In practice, these are the first two. And the Wellington? It certainly is not watching, since, in turn, it is in BlackRock with 3.36%. The metaphor of the 50 heads and 100 hands begins to be effective. Furthermore, Vanguard and Wellington are also present in Pfizer's shareholders through mutual funds, Vanguard Wellington Fund 0.96%, Vanguard Specialized Healthcare Fund 1.31%, Vanguard 500 Index Fund 2.05%, Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund 2.80%. If, on the one hand, we cannot, nor do we intend, to reach outlandish conclusions about the forms of control of global health, on the other hand, we certainly cannot help but question the value of some data, especially those of a social network now known for selling user logins to Spotify, Netflix, Amazon and Microsoft. In light of the established financial link between the pharmaceutical, financial, and social networks sectors, at least some doubts arise regarding supervision. Who can control its work? What is, if it ever exists, the criterion by which to define this work? Perhaps, it is impossible to derive a real definition from it. We now add that among Pfizer's large shareholders we also find the large banks, Bank of America, Deutsche Bank, Morgan Stanley, J.P. Morgan et.al. If we turn to AstraZeneca, the leitmotif does not change. BlackRock owns 7.7%, Wellington 5.9%, and Vanguard 3.5%, together with the usual banking sector. And it certainly cannot be overlooked that BlackRock, Vanguard, and Wellington have solid and substantial equity interests in most of the multinationals that produce weapons, among which we can mention Lockheed Martin Corporation, Raytheon RTN, B Systems, Northrop Grumman Corporation and Orbital ATK and General Dynamics. In the last excursion of this mini-check, it should be remembered that the unrivaled BlackRock is the largest shareholder of UniCredit with 5.2% and owns 5.7% of MPS, 5% of Intesa and 4.8% of Telecom Italia. But there is no shortage of equity investments in Atla NTIA, Azimuth, Prysmian, UBE etc. As it happened, at the time of the EBA stress tests of 2016 and 2018, BlackRock and Vanguard were the companies in charge of supervisory consultancy, i.e. the companies that had, and still have, stakes in banks to be controlled. And it doesn't stop there. If we consider that Wellington owns 6.1% of the shares of Served Group, the Italian company that evaluates the creditworthiness and risk class of our companies, while Vanguard has an exposure to Piazza Affari for more than 9 billion, then the duty to find a definition for the work of the lobbies, their extensions, and their combinations, is paramount. The definition, mentioned above, is by no means the whim of those who delight in the use of the scientific method, it is not the philosophical diversion of a defenseless policy or the attempt to redeem a religious community. Instead, above all, it is the presupposition of a logical recognition of the question, the indispensable epistemological premise for identifying the differences between good and evil, between what is right and what is wrong. We certainly do not aspire to possess who knows what panacea, but the creation of an adequate legislative framework must pass from the recognition, as already mentioned, of a concrete and linear phenomenon. Ignoring some or even one of them means taking on a very serious historical fault, letting everything and the opposite of everything happen. The superficiality with which, very frequently, governments pretend not to see and not know is alarming, so much so that, at a certain point, people are scandalized by such phrases. Pfizer's stock has earned several points after the announcement of the effectiveness of the vaccine, phrases used in articles full of allusions and innuendos and whose authors believe they have made who knows what discovery, where they have done nothing but attest that the well is damp. Do we think that the markets do not reward a pharmaceutical company that has just discovered an anti-pandemic vaccine? Unfortunately, it is not easy, in a period of great political, economic, and health tension, to show a good capacity for discernment, although, at the same time, they cannot be neglected. Allow us the expression. The integrity requirements. A decade ago, Pfizer was convicted of illegally putting drugs into circulation. He was almost unscathed by paying a $2.3 billion fine. $2.3 billion, for a company that has an annual turnover of more than 50 billion and a net profit of more than 16 billion, is not a fine, it is, neither more nor less, a tax on revenues. Something similar has happened, for example, to the big banks that for years have altered interest rates. They have suffered fines, which, of course, in the face of profits, always fall within the field of indirect taxation. The expression lends itself to metaphor, it is evident, but there is no room for outline irony. Hence, one cannot help but draw attention once again to the problem of definition. Can the cause and effect relationship between the willful misconduct and the sanction be reduced solely to an economic estimate, which is never directly proportional to the damage caused? In an evolved society, can such a distance be accepted between the judgment that is issued on the common man, the one who has no bargaining power, and that which is issued on the economic superstructures of the planet, not otherwise than if there was an extraordinary law? Perhaps, it would be the opportune moment to try the way of the answer. In 2000, the Washington Post, in conducting an investigation into Pfizer, brought to the attention of the general public precisely the controversial case of a serious epidemic in which the pharmaceutical company had played a role, to say the least, spooky and disturbing. In particular, the facts date back to 1996, when some children in the Nigerian city of Kano, affected by meningococcal meningitis, were subjected to an experiment without any kind of authorization. On that occasion, the experimentation passed from the administration of trovafloxacin, an experimental drug, precisely, and which, according to the accusations, caused, in some cases, the death of the sick and, in others, irreparable damage. The umpteenth course, and conclusive, reflection that we feel the obligation to make does not refer to the sense of scandal, since, most likely, fraud does not arise with man, but before man. The same can be said for financial plots. Instead, it refers to the already evident and clear separation between the moral status of the citizen and that of the economic potentates. The problem, mind you, exists and is serious, if it is true and irrefutable that certain empires cannot be condemned and made to collapse because their collapse would generate such a quantity of economic disasters that civil society would recover with difficulty. Lehman Brothers Doset. It is equally true that an ordinary citizen, for much less decisive errors, risks social judicial defeat. Yet, today, COVID has hit mainly ordinary citizens.